So I would like to introduce our facilitator, moderator for the panel today. Today's facilitator is Dan Pomeroy. Dan, my apologies if I'm not saying your last name right. How do you pronounce it?
Pomeroy.
Pomeroy. So Dan Pomeroy is the Executive Director of Scientific Citizenship Initiative, SCI, at the Harvard Medical School. Prior to joining SCI, he also helped develop MIT Policy Lab at the Center for International Studies, which actually develops and enhances relationship between MIT researchers with the public policy world. Dan also serves at the External Advisory Board and steering committees of a number of programs designed to increase civic engagement and expand career opportunity for scientists and engineers. Dan received his PhD in physics from Brandeis University in 2012, studying high energy physics. He then served as a postdoc fellow at National Academies of Sciences and AAAS Science and Tech Policy Fellow in the office of Senator Edward J. Markey. He also has extensive experience in grassroots political organizing, running volunteer LGBT right campaigns, as well as professionally directing field offices during 2008 election. Thank you very much for coming and facilitating this session, Dan. It's all yours now.
Everyone, great. My name is Bernard. I'm a fourth-year PhD student at Hopkins, and I'm also the Eastern Hub co-chair at the National Science Policy Network.
Hi, everybody. So I'm currently a legislative analyst with the University of California and also the Chief Outreach Officer for Journal of Science Policy and Governance.
Hello, hello, hello. Folks might remember me from Module 2. My name is Chanel. I am a legislative policy consultant in the California State Assembly and alumni of the Science Fellows Program out of the California Council of Science and Technology. I did my PhD at Hopkins a number of years ago. A couple of other hats I wear. I'm the professional development and mentorship coordinator with NSPN, National Science Policy Network. And in a former life, I was also an associate editor with JSPG and a early career policy ambassador with the Society for Neuroscience. Really happy to be here.
Mark Baer served as Chief of Staff in the U.S. Senate and the House of Representatives during a 20-year Capitol Hill career. I now help scientists and engineers get funding, gain influence, and build relationships, mainly through workshops that I do, online training, consulting, and coaching. I also host the weekly podcast, When Science Speaks, which is at whensciencespeaks.com for those of you keeping score at home. I went to Cornell undergrad. I also guest lecture now at the Cornell School of Biomedical Engineering and their science policy boot camp. And I got my master's at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard in Master in Public Policy.
So I want to just give you kind of a brief introduction to how we might think about empowering early career researchers to advocate, which I think will be helpful for this module and moving forward. And this is something that I'm really interested in as well. So my path to what I'm currently working on has been mostly related to the workforce. So this is just a couple of publications showing that while the workforce has increased as a result of the NIH doubling and other factors, there remains little interest in academic careers. So you can see this graph here that PhD students tend to have maybe around an 80% interest in academic careers when they start. And later on in their PhD, that decreases to about 55% and 25% lose interest in academic careers. So the way that academia works is, we're still training people to stay in the system. And however, the system is changing and the workforce is changing. So we need to think about what that looks like in terms of how we need to be training grad students. So this is sort of the traditional model, thinking about just having, being a PhD or a postdoc, having a mentor, and that will help you, go into academic careers or industry or other related careers. However, this is expanding now, and obviously in the context of what we're talking about here in advocacy, thinking about the NIH BEST model specifically, which encompasses other tools as well, including career development, mentorship, professional development, experiential learning, and some of these things will hopefully teach you in this class as well. And this essentially helps them transition into a variety of careers, including science policy. So with this context, in terms of advocacy, thinking about learning how to advocate is a really important skill, not only for career development, but for really getting the voices of ECRs out there, which is what we're trying to do here as well. So I'm just going to show you two examples and two ways that I've advocated. The first one is through Future Research, which is a nonprofit that represents early career researchers, through grassroots advocacy to promote systemic change to the way we do science. And so one thing to consider here is this advocacy is geared towards institutions and institutional leadership and administration to advocate for ACRs and improve the system for them to be while they're in training. So this is one of the studies that we did starting in 2016, looking at the institutional compliance with the FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act. Essentially, this is a labor law that mandated that postdoc salaries would increase across institutions. We did this large national study to look at the compliance of institutions, as well as gathered specific salary data, which is the graph on the right here. So the interesting thing about this is that we learned that there are a number of different titles for postdocs, and you can see the salaries range quite a bit based on that. So we've actually been able to use this data to advocate for increased salaries, which have happened at certain institutions as a result of this work. So this was very exciting. It's a good example of showing that advocacy works, and evidence-based research can really affect what happens in institutions, and this is an important thing to consider in terms of how we're paying our ECRs. So this is one example in one of the nonprofits that I've been involved with. So this is also kind of specific to nonprofits. The other one is JSPG, which has been mentioned already. So I think here, again, this is also around elevating the voices of ECRs in a different way through JSPG, which is an independent, open access, and peer-reviewed publication. It's also a nonprofit. And the goal is to bolster both research and writing credentials for ECRs and provide professional development through writing and editing, as well as applying to the editorial board. And this is just one of the recent projects that we've had. So you can see here the issues that we published recently on emerging technologies, which is really exciting because we're able to partner with the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, which is essentially a youth group in the United Nations that advocates for young people to get involved in policy and advocacy in specific issues. And we're also able to do a webinar, which you can see here, with several leaders in the United Nations who are working on these issues, and have a intergenerational conversation with students who are able to get their papers published in JSPG. So it was an extremely successful event that was international, intergenerational, and really provided them with opportunities to talk to UN leaders that they wouldn't have otherwise. So this is another way of thinking about not only teaching early career researchers about science communication and advocacy, but actually doing advocacy in this way in terms of bringing them opportunities where they're able to interact with folks who are at higher levels, but also get their publications out there and talking about them. So it's another way of empowering ECRs. So just before wrapping up here, I want to just give you a little bit of an idea of how I would think about advocating for a specific area, since you're going to be doing this later. So if I were to advocate for increased postdoc salaries, for example, these are the things I would consider. And this is something that I actually give when I give workshops on advocacy, is thinking about what are the barriers to this advocacy? What solutions do you foresee? What skills do you have now? What would you like to develop? And how do you currently take action to advocate for your cause? And how can you do better? So just, it's useful to do an assessment of what the landscape looks like and what you're able to do and what you would want to do and improve on. So just to give a quick example, then if I were to say, advocating for increased postdoc salaries, this is sort of the structure I would follow, which you're sort of going to do also today. I would say, my name is Adriana Bankston. I'm currently a board member on Future of Research. I'm advocating specifically for postdoc salaries, and the message that I'm trying to send here is that we need to increase postdoc salaries in order to retain talent in science, as well as retain our leadership across on a global scale in terms of the US. And the reason why is because if we don't, we'll lose the best people who are able to stay in science. And this is really a barrier now to actually keeping talent, because people want to stay in science, but they can't afford to because they're not getting paid enough. So this is just an example of kind of framing this. You could say something at the end of, this is why we're asking for your support. A lot of this advocacy, I think, will be for funding for a specific area, but just to kind of give you a little primer of how I think about this. And then lastly, I just want to leave you with a few advocacy resources and things you can do. So we'll be talking about this in the class as far as getting involved in public outreach, organizing a State Hill Day, designing advocacy workshops, as well as contacting your local representatives and getting engaged in town hall. So a lot of this we'll be discussing in the local engagement module, as well as writing op-eds and contacting news reporters, etc. So hopefully what you're learning here will be useful, but just to show you that these are things that you actually would be doing in the real world. And then here are just a few of the resources from scientific societies around some of these things. And I'll share the slides afterwards, but there's a lot of different opportunities to get involved in advocacy.
Yeah, there are a lot of really cool organizations in there. I just want to take a minute and ask if you could explain it all about how you found them and how you got involved in the organizations that you've been involved in.
That's a good question. So I would say that just followed my interest in terms of training ECRs, because I was sort of trying to figure out my own transition out of academia into policy, and started to become involved with different organizations that were kind of both on the training and policy side. A lot of them come from conferences. I think for me, scientific societies have been really helpful in that I sort of transitioned from going to the science side of the meeting to sort of the professional development. And then once you start developing sort of your network in policy, then things just sort of happen. Social media is really helpful. Twitter was instrumental when I was starting out, and doing a lot of informational interviews to learn what different individuals in policy are working on. And, I think you're going to sort of build your network and find out what's out there as you start exploring. But social media was definitely helpful, as well as scientific conferences.
Great. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I definitely think networking is important in all fields, but especially in a field like science policy. And informational interviews is definitely something I didn't know about while I was still in grad school, and it's probably one of the most important things I learned after grad school. So that's really great advice.